Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Employment First and Retain Kentucky Employer Seminar Series today. My name is Kimberly Wickert with Retain Kentucky at the Human Development Institute at the University of Kentucky. And I am a white female with blonde hair and glasses. Today I'm wearing a black and white shirt with a black sweater over it, and I have a blue Retain virtual background. While we are pulling up the slideshow for you today, I will go ahead and just do a couple housekeeping items. We do have captioning available, and you can see in the bottom of your Zoom screen, it says show captions, so you are able to control that there. And if you have questions today, we very much welcome your questions and your ability to interact with our subject matter experts. And I will be monitoring this throughout the presentation. So please place those in the chat. And I wanted to let you know this recording will be uploaded at our Retain Kentucky Media website, and I will put that link in the chat as well. And we will be sending out certificates of attendance to all attendees within the next week. And we would just ask that when you get the survey sent to you following today's webinar, that you go ahead and complete that to be able to provide us with feedback for our future webinars. So today our topic is employment issues facing workers with disabilities with criminal justice system involvement. And I'm going to be introducing Dr. Chelsea Bramer and Dr. Phil Rumrell here in just a minute. But let's go ahead and move to the next slide if we can. And just want to share that the information in this presentation does not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Employment First Council, the University of Kentucky Human Development Institute, or its employees. And we make every attempt to provide accessible, accurate, and current information. Let's go ahead and move on. And I would like to invite you all to join us for our October 16th Employer Seminar Series. Ways employers can engage, include, and amplify workers in the recruitment and retention process with Katie Wolf-Whaley, our Employment First Council Chair, to share how to elevate the workforce through the contributions of people with disabilities. And I also have put that in the chat as well. You can register at that link. So please join us. And we are just wanted to give you a reminder about our Retain Kentucky eligibility criteria. We are serving individuals who live anywhere in Kentucky. They can be currently employed or must have at least worked in the last 12 months. And their reason for their injury or inability to work must not be work-related. And there are also ways that you can reach us. And yeah, perfect. Move right on to the next slide. Via email, our website, or our QR code. So we're, however people can get to us, that's what we're going to be able to respond to them as well. So now we will get to the exciting part. So thank you all for joining me and welcoming our subject matter experts today. I'm really excited about this topic and the presenters. Dr. Chelsea Bramer serves as a researcher with the Innovative Partnership for the Advancement of Rehabilitation Research and Training at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She currently works on the Vocational Rehabilitation Technical Assistance Center for Quality Employment grant, where she primarily focuses on improving quality employment outcomes among individuals with disabilities that have been justice impacted. Her research interests include reentry and rehabilitation of individuals with disabilities and chronic health conditions that have experienced incarceration, employment as a driver to improve overall participation and well-being, and individual career development. Joining Dr. Bramer today is also Dr. Philip Rumrell, PhD, CRC, and he's a professor of counselor education and director of research in the Human Development Institute at the University of Kentucky. He is well known as one of the leading rehabilitation researchers in the United States, and he has studied the employment and educational implications of disability extensively. His recent books include Foundations of the Vocational Rehabilitation Process, 8th edition, Case Management and Rehabilitation Counseling, 6th edition, and Research and Rehabilitation Counseling, 4th edition. And again, I am so grateful to have both of you here today. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise. And I will go ahead and turn the presentation over to both of you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Just a quick opportunity to give a description. So thank you, Kimberly. As she said, my name is Chelsea Bramer. Today I am wearing a quarter zip. It's finally getting a little bit chillier in Wisconsin, so I get to wear a sweater. I have a blue background today with a white stripe that just shows the IPART logo, which is the group that I work for at UW-Madison. So.
Thank you, Dr. Bramer. This is Phil Rumrell. Hi, everyone. Kimberly, thanks for having us today. I am phoning in today, but just in the interest of universal design, I'll reluctantly give a visual description of myself. I am a 56-year-old white male. I'm bald with a few tufts of gray hair. I have hazel-colored eyes. Pronouns he, his, and him. I'm wearing a blue shirt with a red and blue striped tie, and I'm sitting in front of or in back of a nondescript background in my home office. So glad to be with you all.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Rumrell. Just a quick acknowledgement and disclaimer that the work I'm doing right now is currently being supported by the QE project, as Kimberly mentioned. And so important disclaimer that what we chat about today is not endorsed by the federal government or the U.S. Department of Education. Okay, so our objectives today are really to examine the population of people with justice system involvement who are attempting to either enter or remain in the labor force. We feel it's really important to couch who we're talking about before we get too far into it. And then importantly, we will discuss the intersection of disability and incarceration, present some of the common concerns that I think folks who are formerly incarcerated or justice involved are having while seeking employment opportunities. And then really the thing that I'm excited about is to have a discussion about what is working to explore considerations to encourage or improve hiring outcomes for these folks. And then we have an example of a federally funded project focused on retention to discuss a potential approach in working with people with justice involvement. If you have questions or thoughts throughout, please feel free to utilize the chat. And Kimberly has shared that she will ask those questions throughout. So I'm happy to take questions during and also after. Okay, so one thing to think about when we're discussing incarceration by the numbers is that these are all estimates. It's really hard to get an accurate number of just how many individuals are currently incarcerated, currently being released, and also who have a disability. So these are all estimates, but come from the most recent set of estimations. So about 79 million individuals is the estimated number that have some sort of criminal record. And that equates to about 1 in 3 adults, which feels like a huge number because it is. And important to note that also includes people who may have a record but never spent time in a correctional facility. So they have a record on file that's going to come up in an employment setting, but maybe weren't sentenced to a correctional facility. 600,000 is the estimated number of individuals who are released from U.S. prisons each year. And so that's specifically prison and not jail. And then 2 million is an estimation of the number of individuals that we have currently incarcerated in the US. That number also shows that 95% of those 2 million individuals are eventually going to be able to return and come back to each of our communities. And so when we think about setting up services and supports for these individuals, we don't just send people to prison for the rest of their lives. Many, many people are getting out. So of that 95%, we want to be focused on how we can best serve those folks. Another important statistic or figure of group of people are those that are serving their sentences or adjudications in the community. And so that would be individuals on either probation or parole. So individuals on parole may have spent some of their sentence in a correctional facility, and then they get to spend the rest of their sentence in the community. That number's over 800,000 individuals. And then folks who are on probation who get sentenced to a probationary period rather than going to a facility is 2.9 million. Those certainly have implications for job opportunities as well as the hiring process. So both Dr. Rumrell and I feel it's really important to address the intersectionality of so many other identities when we think about folks who are justice involved or justice impacted. And so the first one that we have here, this is not all encompassing, but these were some of the big ones that we wanted to address, is poverty. So individuals in prisons and jails disproportionately experience poverty. One of the drivers of that is our bail bond system. So if an individual is arrested, for example, on a felony conviction, they may be placed in a jail awaiting arraignment, and that median bail bond price can be as high as $10,000. And so we see that this isn't a linear process, but poverty can serve as both a predictor and a consequence for a number of reasons, including spending time in corrections decreases your opportunity to obtain wealth. It creates debt. There's a lot of fees associated with being incarcerated and then being on parole. And it significantly impacts job opportunities or lifetime earnings. The second area of intersectionality that we really want to address is race. We cannot ignore the significant overrepresentation of people of color within our prison and jail system. And specifically, Black Americans are at the top of that list when we think about discrepancies. So the most recent estimates state that 38% of our incarcerated population in the US identify as Black Americans, and they only make up 12% of US residents. So clearly a huge discrepancy in the amount of people of color who are ending up in our prisons and jails in comparison to those in the community. The next one specifically relates to experiential intersectionality. So in relation to trauma, one study that was done in 2019 looked at adverse childhood experiences and tried to compare what does the currently incarcerated population or sample that they looked at look like in comparison to the community. And so the national normative averages at that time were about 15% of females in the community had experienced an adverse childhood, at least 4 adverse childhood experiences or ACEs, and 9% of males. When they looked at what they referred to as the inmate sample, I do not use the term inmate, but in this study that was what was referred to as. So 65% of the individuals from the female facility identified as having at least 4 ACEs, 64% of the specific subset of male individuals who were incarcerated but had been convicted of some sort of sexual offense, and then 42% of what they considered a low-risk population. And I think, if my memory serves correctly, it was first-time offender, nonviolent, and maybe like some sort of marker where they were serving less than 5 years of their sentence. So we see that among all 3 of these populations, the ACEs are significantly higher, showing that the experience of individuals who have gone through traumatic experiences, that there is a huge tie and intersectionality to those individuals who end up incarcerated. The last one is health and disability, and because that's the topic, then we'll cover that in the next couple of slides. But I want to pause here and see if Dr. Rumrell has anything to add for our intersectionality.
Well, only just I appreciate you, Dr. Bramer, for just that first slide by the numbers, just looking at the magnitude of the problem, and it is a problem when we've got more than 70 million Americans who have criminal backgrounds, and around 6 million people are either currently incarcerated on probation or on parole. And we certainly see higher rates of incarceration among people with certain kinds of disabilities. So the co-occurrence of disability and justice system involvement, and those of you who work in the field see this all the time, and we do in all of our projects. And it's a very different process helping someone find a job if they have a justice system involvement than if they don't. And we just have to acknowledge that fact. We have to work differently around things like disclosure and what you put on your resume and how you explain gaps in employment and all of those kinds of things. So it's only responsible for us to get this all on the table and think about ways that we have to work differently for folks who have had a history of involvement with the justice system, even if that was a long time ago.
Certainly. Thank you. Okay, so when we think about health and specifically disability or chronic health conditions and incarceration, how do we figure out how many people that are currently or formerly incarcerated have a disability? And so these figures and numbers come from the most recent report from the Bureau of Justice Statistics. And so what they do is they take a sample of all of the facilities across the United States, and they work really hard to get a representative sample of individuals who are currently in a prison or a jail setting. And so this data was collected in 2016 and then published in 2021. And so from this data, we see that they have an estimated number of 38% of individuals self-reported that they had a disability. Now, I am a bit of a stats nerd, so I like to dig in. Where do these numbers come from and what do they mean? And I think that can be really helpful when we're trying to understand this number. So that is actually a pretty modest estimation when we look at how it was defined. So the way that they categorize disability in this self-report study is much like we do in the American Community Survey. So they ask these handful of questions, and if an individual answers yes or no to each of these, and I believe you'll have access to the slides, so I won't go through each of the definitions, but they include hearing, vision, cognition, ambulatory, being able to move about, self-care, and then independent living. And so this study also reports on a handful of other health markers. So individuals who reported that they were diagnosed with ADHD, 24%, individuals who participated in special education classes, and those who self-identified as having a learning disability. So each of these figures were given as separate statistics and not necessarily combined. And so we know that this is likely an underestimation. We also know that from self-report data, both Black and Hispanic individuals who were surveyed are less likely to report a disability. And when we think about that in context of being in a justice facility while being surveyed, there are a lot of justifiable reasons why a person of color or any individual in prison may choose not to self-disclose their disability for fear of where that information might be taken. The other groups that are not included in this would be individuals with many different mental health disorders, substance use disorders, chronic health, and pain disorders. So as I make these lists, you can see that 38% probably doesn't capture the total number of folks. So I mentioned mental illness or mental health may be a likely underestimation. So this same report came up with 43% of individuals in state facilities and 23% of individuals in federal facilities reported a mental health problem. We know that there is a criminalization of mental illness in our country. The ways that our systems need to treat individuals who are in crisis often lends to calling the police, which leads to individuals being arrested on suspicion of crime. Higher rates of both depression and overall mental health concerns are certainly true for people while they are incarcerated. It is a very, very tough environment to spend any amount of time in, let alone for very long sentences. A study that was done in 2016 found that almost half of their sample met the criteria for PTSD. Those folks were currently incarcerated. We also see that research consistently just shows that there's overall mental health concerns, including stress, depression, and poor overall health. So access to health while incarcerated or confined is much more difficult. Another study found that almost half of the individuals incarcerated were found to have a mental illness, and almost 30% of those folks were categorized as having what we would consider a severe mental illness. Again, much like poverty, mental illness can be both a predictor and a consequence of incarceration, so it's really hard to tease out. But where this helps us in thinking about how to serve folks is coming with the lens that we know people are experiencing really, really tough life experiences while incarcerated, and so how can we take that into considerations for employment in the future? Dr. Rummel, anything you'd like to add for the health slides?
Well, just that idea of criminalization of disability in general, and we know that both law enforcement and courts tend to interpret behavior as criminal if the behavior is observed in a person with a mental illness or an intellectual or developmental disability. We're more likely to interpret the same behavior as criminal than if the person doesn't have a disability. So whether people with those disabilities commit more crimes or not remains to be seen. But when they do behave in certain ways, they're more likely to have charges associated with that behavior. They're more likely to be convicted, and they're more likely to be incarcerated. And so when you take that into account, that at least partly explains the overrepresentation of people with disabilities in the group of folks who have any kind of justice system involvement. You're more likely to be adjudicated into the system, and more likely to have an unfavorable outcome in the system if you have an existing disability. It's a bare fact. It's unfortunate, but it's the way it is, and it explains the co-occurrence situation, I think.
Yeah, great, thank you. Okay, so the reason that we spend so much time thinking about understanding the population of people who are either currently incarcerated or have experienced incarceration is I think it really drives what we want to focus on today when we think about employment post-release. So release can look different for folks. Like I was saying, some may still be what would be considered on papers. So they're still have a probationary or parole sentence and are working with community corrections. And there are also folks who have been released, are no longer connected to the Department of Corrections, but have a record that is going to come up in an employment setting. So we know that work can lead to several positive reentry outcomes post-release. Some of the research goes back and forth whether or not employment makes a difference, but when we focus on employment that is a good fit, drives meaning, and helps an individual connect to their community, we know that these positive outcomes are happening at significantly higher rates. So an obvious one is that work provides financial security. It also gives an opportunity for a positive social network, self-efficacy. It feels really good to do things that we know that we're good at. Gives someone a routine, a sense of meaning, and all of those things provide that support that when we connect people to meaningful employment, it does improve reentry. It also fosters both the social and the economic integration. So we're sort of knocking out two birds, one stone. But unfortunately, individuals face significant employment barriers and have a lot of difficulty obtaining employment. So to give a statistic based on that, there was one longitudinal study that was done throughout an entire state. They followed a large set of individuals, and almost 75% of them were still unemployed a year after release. And so we think about trying to assist people when you're first released and you have a lot of hope about your future and potential. And if you have been job searching for over a year and not finding any ties, it is a bit more understanding why individuals would just slip back into their less pro-social bad habits if they don't feel like the world of work is for them. So there's many more challenges that are probably on this list, but I think these are a few that stand out to us and that in my years of working with folks who have been justice impacted really stand out a lot. So one is explaining gaps in your employment history. Almost everybody has to set up some sort of resume or fill it into a job application to be able to state what they've been doing. And explaining that gap in history can be a really stress-inducing experience, particularly for people who have longer sentences. And so being able to decide for yourself whether you're going to put your work experiences that you used while in prison, or if you're just going to leave it up to the interview setting, but explaining that gap can be a very difficult challenge. Limited educational opportunities and lower overall education levels. So we know that folks entering into the justice system have lower overall levels of educational attainment, and then that's only exacerbated while they're incarcerated, because unfortunately, while there are educational opportunities at some facilities, it's not true that it is available to everybody all the time. And unsurprisingly, those programs are very popular, and so they often have waiting lists, and it's not always an opportunity to be able to gain whatever education the individual is hoping to get. Both public stigma and then leading to self-stigma. So our society often has a lot of stigmatizing beliefs about what it means to have spent time incarcerated, certainly for particular criminal offenses. We see stigma associated with what type of person that individual may be, whether or not they are predicted to commit crime in the future. And so someone carries all of those with them all of the time, and they know what people think about them. And so that can lead to this self-stigma, which is clearly detrimental and also adds to the challenges of post-employment success. The World Wide Web makes accessing records very easy. So individuals can often just be Googled with a standard Google search. And we also know that employers are utilizing databases that have access to individuals' records. One thing that can be particularly difficult is for those who have obtained expungement. I've unfortunately personally experienced an individual where they received a job offer, they had a record that had been expunged, so they didn't need to release it, and then they weren't hired for the job because the employer was using an older database that still included their record prior to it being expunged. So we see too many instances where this is information where once it's learned, it's sort of hard to unlearn, and it is still causing additional challenges to become employed. Post-release requirements, that is quite difficult to say, and prioritizing employment. So once an individual is released into the community, there are so many things coming at them in being able to attempt to adjust back to society, and those can include post-release requirements from probation and parole. And so that may be things like submitting urine analysis tests regularly, attending therapy or group counseling settings. Maybe it's additional requirements if you're attempting to get your children back in your life. And so each of those things can sometimes take priority over employment. And so while we as employment people are trying to get individuals to focus on what we're trying to do with their employment, I think understanding that there are all of these other competing priorities that may be taking center stage and delaying that individual's work in the hiring process. Those demands can also include things like trying to attempt to connect with family, figuring out who your new social network is. If you're moving to a new community or reassimilating back to your old community, all of those things come together. And then particularly for people who have disabilities, the health component is a huge marker of time, trying to reset up all of your doctor's appointments or get your medication set up or connecting with therapy or other health supports. All of those things take a lot of time and can feel like they should be prioritized over work. And then we know that nationally, folks who are incarcerated deal with a lot of difficulty in finding housing, setting up reliable transportation. And then the last one is that they go into the hiring process feeling like they don't have any rights. And so the opportunity to feel like you're getting taken advantage of by an employer and that you don't have legal protections in instances like the expungement example. And Dr. Rumrell, I don't know if you want to add anything to these challenges here.
No.
Great. Okay, so what can be done? This is a list that Dr. Rumrell and I have come together and made that in our experience, there is no one size fits all. And so these are a few pieces of advice that I think have helped along the way. So the first one is if you're assisting an individual or you're the person conducting an interview, getting to know the person and really acknowledging the vulnerability in disclosure. I often talk about a criminal record feeling like it's the worst thing you've ever done in your life tattooed across your forehead. And so I know if I had to walk about the world like that, I would probably be a little more tense in a lot of the spaces that I go into. And so I think acknowledging just how vulnerable it is to engage or embark on career pursuits, knowing that your record is going to come up, is a vulnerable activity. The other thing is understanding what a record does and does not communicate about an individual in their background check. So sometimes we see circumstances where what an individual was charged with certainly doesn't tell the whole story of who they are. And also things like if a violent offense was tacked onto the sentence, or maybe some sort of circumstance, allowing the individual to tell us about that individual circumstance and not making assumptions based on that record. Understanding the job options. So things like collateral consequences. So this is sort of an umbrella term that encompasses all of the legal ways that people are barred from certain employment opportunities based on their specific record. So for example, if an individual is convicted of a felony offense that has to do with a vehicle, then they can legally not be hired for a job where they would be required to be using a car. Things like that, those collateral consequences, while it can feel like you're just giving a list of all the things that they can't do, I have found in my experience it's actually really empowering. So there is a national inventory of those collateral consequences that you can just go and look up, and I'm happy to share that resource. And so to give an individual that information knows these are the jobs I can't apply for, and these are maybe some creative ways that we can get around that. Work restrictions. So there are sometimes very real work restrictions for individuals who are still on community corrections. For example, if they are tied to an ankle monitor that maybe restricts or limits their travel. Some individuals have curfews that they need to abide by. And so each of those things, knowing those options, can only help us better provide job opportunities. Considering the long-term impacts of institutional living, so things like communication, free movement. I think we know intuitively that the experience of incarceration is different than community, but when we think about an individual who has spent maybe 5, 7, 10 years incarcerated, those adjustments don't just happen automatically. And so I know I have a lot of conversations where we learn about communicating differently, or thinking about how you can better put in things like setting up time constraints that make free movement a little less overwhelming. The other thing is attitudinal changes, overall adjustment, and then mistrust. So I think, unfortunately, for a lot of folks who have spent time in a correctional facility, they have a huge mistrust, not only of the justice system, but also of anybody who's tied to some sort of state program. So when we think about asking them to apply to things or get connected, it can be really difficult when they feel like they can't trust who I am. And so that's where getting to know the person and being transparent about what you are and what you're doing can help a lot. The other thing that has been, I think, proven helpful and is very difficult to implement, I want to acknowledge that, is that we really have to utilize additional patience and time is often the thing that none of us have extra of, to explain the process and justify things like information requests or activities. So I know if I'm working with someone and I need to request their background because I need a better understanding of what's going to come up, telling the person why I'm asking for that information can be really helpful in, one, gaining a good working relationship, but also adding to the trust that you're not just using it to say, add to the stigma of, oh, that person has this offense, and so I think this thing about them. Again, just talking about the rights that someone does have throughout the process and communicating what those hiring practices are. So I know that Kimberly has shared some resources in the chat. I'm much more familiar with the state of Wisconsin regulations because that's where I'm currently located, but taking the time to understand in what ways they do have rights and how we can help. One of the things that often comes up is addressing the gaps in the recruiter, hiring manager, and HR processes. So oftentimes individuals will have a really good connection with the person that did their interview, and then the file gets sent over to HR, and we see that the hiring doesn't happen, or, oh, we've decided to go with a different candidate. And so, one, helping explain to the applicant that this is something that potentially could happen. And if you are an employer or someone who's working with employers who are interested in hiring more folks with criminal backgrounds, is explaining that this gap is one of the ways that folks with backgrounds are being dropped out of the process, even though they are qualified and interviewing well for the position that they're trying to get. And the last one is just having flexibility through the transition. I think I love the gentle reminder that all of us have full lives in and outside of our work. And so remembering that as they're going through all of these adjustments, where can we institute flexibility in helping someone figure out their way and get connected to the community?
Dr. Bramer?
Yeah.
A few of the questions that we had prior to as people were registering were about specific employers in Kentucky that were willing to hire. And you mentioned, I put that in the chat. If you go to that link, the Kentucky Comeback Fair Chance Academy, it lists dozens of individuals who have gone through that Fair Chance Academy with the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce. And it also lists the organization, the employer with whom they work. So I think that's a really great starting point if you're working with somebody who has a justice involved background, and they, you can look at that list and identify the employer and then, that individual as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Kimberly.
Thank you.
Okay, and the last slide of my section here is just the shift in thinking about the opportunity in employment and career development to approach it from a strengths-based approach. So one of the things that we know about our justice system is that it has to work on punishment. So individuals get sentenced after they have been found guilty of a crime, and we know that they go through this incarcerated setting where that is essentially how they're treated the entire time that they're there. And it's based on safety and keeping them confined until they're released. And so I have a very strong belief that when we think about reentry, that we can really shift to this more rehabilitative model that we know works for people with disabilities as well. So reintegrating through strength rather than only focusing on risk or negative aspects can be a huge driver for success. So we know that it helps combat both public and self-stigma harms. The more opportunities that we have to dispel the myths that exist, the less likely they're going to come up the next time. We know that individuals have a higher positive self-concept. They have an opportunity to better persist. And then lastly, from a theoretical conceptual perspective, using the social cognitive theory as our basis, is that using work as the chance to demonstrate mastery. So taking the time to figure out, what are you interested in? What opportunities might you want to be a part of? It is very sombering the number of individuals who I have started to work with and ask the simple question, well, what is it that you want to do? And they share with me, nobody's ever asked me that. And so I think this is a real opportunity to check in with folks that to get them to the good fitting jobs, we have to take the time to learn what it is that they're interested in being a part of. It also improves self-efficacy and then the overall adjustment. And one of the things, I know we got a handful of questions prior to the webinar today, and one of those was in relation to if you're writing a letter to the employer or trying to communicate the gap in employment or the criminal background that's going to come up. How much is too much to share? What's too little? And so I really use it as a career coaching opportunity, and me and the individual, whatever they're comfortable with, we will type out a body of information for them to give a clear and concise picture of what's going to show up on their record. And so I always say that the pertinent information, they're going to find out about it anyway. And so this is your chance to share your story from your perspective. And so helping that individual and coaching them through it, I think the practice of writing it can be one thing, but then we also utilize mock interviewing and sort of use it as like the 2-minute pitch. And so too little, too much. I think getting into the details and trying to excuse your behavior typically doesn't bode very well from the employer perspective, because it can be construed as you're not taking responsibility. And then too little, I think if you are describing it in such a glossed over way that it seems opposite of what will come up on the record. So I think it's being truthful and using that opportunity to communicate who you are and how you have taken agency in your life to do things post or even during incarceration. So that would be my advice on that. But if the person who asked is on the webinar and has follow-up questions, please feel free to chime in. And at the risk of talking far too much, I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Rumroll, where he will talk about the Retain Kentucky project.
Thank you, Dr. Bramer. Appreciate that excellent overview. We just wanted to close by sharing with you some things that we've learned about working with people with disabilities who have justice system involvement through our Retain Kentucky project. And many of you know this is our statewide workforce development initiative funded by the United States Department of Labor. As Kimberly mentioned earlier, we work with people with disabilities who have had at least some experience in the workforce in the last 12 months and still consider themselves members of the workforce. The injury or illness that causes their work limitation cannot be work-related as a requirement of the grant. If you go to the next slide, the one I was just on was just the transition slide. Some information about justice system involvement among our participants. So we have a series of risk factors, that may limit someone's potential to stay in the labor force, and justice system involvement we viewed from the very beginning as one of those. Based on everything you've heard today, you can see why. So we're in the second phase, the large phase of our project. And as you can see on this slide, we've had a total of 3,148 participants join our project. And that's 3,148 on whom we have a full intake data. We asked the question, do you have a previous or pending misdemeanor or felony? And about 74% of our participants so far say no to that item, and about 26% say yes. We do want to say there is a tendency to disclose justice system involvement for all kinds of understandable reasons. And we know that in surveys, about 2/3 of people with justice system involvement actually disclose that they have a record. So if we extrapolate that out, the number of the percentage of folks in our Retain Kentucky project who have justice system involvement may actually be as high as 38%. And that's right on the averages that Dr. Bramer was talking about before. So this population really looks like the rest of America in terms of justice system involvement. Next slide, please. We look at the impact of our services on people with and without justice system involvement. So that's 74% who said no to that item and the 26% who said yes. We compare and contrast them at various points along the way, and particularly at exit. So among our phase 2 participants, these are the enhanced participants. These are the people who took who were randomly assigned to our full case management intervention. Exit for any reason, whether they dropped out of the project, discontinued, stopped working with us, or completed their plan. Folks who did not have justice system involvement were employed at a 57.8% rate at exit. Those who did have justice system involvement employed at 57.6% at exit for any reason. Now, these numbers go way up, but they stay consistent among our folks who actually complete their return to work or stay at work plans. And we're pleased to tell you that 92%, a little more than 92% of people without criminal records who complete their plan are employed at case closure. And just under 92% of folks with justice system involvement who complete the return to work, stay at work plan are employed at closure. So whether we look at the total number of folks who exit for any reason, or whether we look at folks who actually complete their plan, the rate of employment between our participants with and without justice system involvement is nearly identical. And we view this as a strong testament to our return to work coordinators who receive extensive training in working with the person where they are and taking into account all the circumstances that might bear on their employment, including justice system involvement. We go to the next slide, just some considerations that our return to work coordinators take into account when working with that 26% of folks who acknowledge that they've had justice system involvement. From other research, we know that having a felony conviction can eliminate up to 85% of the available jobs in one's labor market. That is, the job is not available to you as a matter of law or policy, or employer just simply won't hire you on the basis of that. And that's a felony conviction. More on that in just a moment. Therefore, transferable skills analysis, looking at what you did for work customarily and what you might do now, becomes a difficult proposition. Just because we're dealing with a limited segment of the available job market. Kimberly mentioned the Kentucky Fair Chance Academy. We certainly want to recommend that to your attention, and other second chance employers and job posting repositories. Do check out the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce and its sponsorship of this program. If you're an employer and you want to see how other employers are giving people second opportunities to get their career started. If you're working with people with disabilities in placement and you want to target employers who are known to be amenable to hiring folks with justice system involvement, check this out. It's a tremendous resource. But we have to acknowledge that there's very little legal protection. In some states, no legal protection for people who have justice system involvement. You don't have rights related to it, so you can be fired or laid off, or there's no such thing as discrimination if your characteristic, that is justice system involvement, is not protected. So that creates difficulties. Employers can just simply not hire you on the basis of your record. Very little folks can do, and this can be very, very discouraging. Because of this, we work a lot with folks in expungement or reduction of their charges, every extent possible. This felony issue is huge. We really try to encourage folks to get those things reduced to misdemeanors, plead it down if you can. You just don't want that felony following you when there's a choice. But then the expungement issue, you have to make sure that it actually does stay off your record, as Dr. Bramer mentioned. Disclosure, we talked about this already, a highly personal issue. Should you mention it? Should you not? Are they going to find out anyway? Is there a tendency sometimes to over-disclose and you talk yourself out of an opportunity? These are the considerations we have to make. And frankly, folks, it depends on the crime. It depends on the nature of the justice system involvement that people have. It depends on the job that they're seeking. It depends on people's own willingness and comfort in sharing their story. So a lot to consider there. Next slide, and I know we are running short on time, just a few more considerations. The gaps in employment that Dr. Bramer also already mentioned. Emphasizing job training and education that was completed either as part of while they were incarcerated, as part of probation or parole. Sometimes we don't think of these things in quite that way, but giving the fullest account of the training that you have becomes very important. There's restrictions on moving and relocation, as Dr. Bramer mentioned before. The need to report to probation and parole officers and let them know what's happening in the job search. For many folks, having a productive employment is a condition of probation and parole. High rates of mental health and substance use disorders, as Dr. Bramer mentioned. This means we've got to make sure people are linked up to the resources that can help them in managing those effects and those co-occurring considerations. And then we want to encourage everyone to think about the opportunity that attends to our current national labor shortage. 4.2% unemployment, 2 job openings for every applicant for jobs nationwide. It's a little more than that, actually, in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. I think, Dr. Bramer, that this has actually opened employers' minds more than anything else is. The plain fact is that employers need help, they need workers, and they need to include a more diverse, to use an overused word, a more diverse labor pool than they ever did before. You've got to include workers that you might not have included for various reasons prior, including people with disabilities, including people with justice system involvement, and including people who have both of those characteristics. So we have opportunities where employers are more accommodating. They're more amenable to giving people an opportunity than they ever have because of the business and economic imperative of doing that. and we see this as a good thing. And those of us who work in this business, we want to take full advantage of that. So don't underestimate the valuable labor resource that exists among people who may have made mistakes in the past, but are looking to get their careers on track, who may also have co-occurring disabilities, but still a lot to contribute to the economy if we can make the right matches and continue to work to educate employers about the benefits of hiring good workers to do work that is needed in the Commonwealth and nationally. That's most of what we've got to say today. Go to the next slide. It's just a concluding slide, Kimberly. We'd be happy to hang around and entertain any questions, comments, or anything in the chat. But Dr. Bramer, any words in closing? And I'll just close by thanking you all for the opportunity to be with you here today. And Chelsea, always a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you all for being with us today and listening to us chat. I love any opportunity to talk about this more and share the information. And I just wanted to emphasize the last point that Dr. Rumrell was talking about, that we know, in thinking about how would you present this information to employers if you're trying to expand their willingness to hire someone with a background and or a disability, that both populations of people with disabilities and individuals with backgrounds, when we get them into good fit employment settings, they're actually more likely to stay on the job. They tend to be very good workers, and they're committed to being a productive member of that part of their community. And so as the selling point, they are being tracked by the Department of Corrections to make sure that they're keeping the job. So someone else is also encouraging that to happen. But also it is just that they just need someone to give them a chance. And by and large, that they become really good workers. And so when you're sharing that information, that we have things like federal bonding that can help if an employer is reluctant to hire someone. But I also think from a practical standpoint, employers save money if they don't have to keep going and rehiring people for those positions. So thank you all for listening and chatting with us, and we'll take any questions that you have.
Thank you both very much. There was a couple comments that the statistics about those who did have backgrounds and those did not was really a good stat. So kudos to the return to work coordinators and the retained team. And then also Jonathan Drummond said he really likes the opportunity knocks, and really we need to think about it that way. And just appreciate you both sharing your expertise. I will say, in addition to the federal bonding, the state of Kentucky, I just learned at a conference last month, provides bonding for employers as well. So that's an option too. And I will mail this PowerPoint out when we send out the certificates of attendance to everybody too. So I think we got all the comments and questions, and thank you all so much, both so much. Thank you everyone for joining. It was just this great information. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know sometimes the questions related to this can be very specific to individual circumstances. Fortunately, my part of my position as a full-time researcher right now is providing technical assistance in exactly this area. So if you have particular questions or you're looking for resources, please feel free to send me an email. And I always tell people, if I don't know the answer, I will at least help you find it. So.
Perfect. Lots of thank yous and really informative in the chat. So thank you both, and hope you all have a great rest of your day.